So just so you guys know, I do have some insight. I am an ex-national, so I have done some of the stuff that you guys done, but it's been a long time. So I have some insights. So, I was like, well, how do we do injury prevention? And the best people that do injury prevention are the professional athletes, because someone's willing to spend a boatload of money on them. And so if we look at LeBron James, he has been around for a long time, and he has, or in their world, and he's done really, really well, and he takes really good care of himself. And so, what do we learn from that and that model, that we are athletes, and that's how we need to really look at our bodies and look at our lives and that kind of stuff. And I was thinking about who are the patrollers that have been around the longest, because those are the people who we get to learn from, because they are successful. Their habits, the stuff that they do on and off the hill, are what we really learn. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of review of some of the amazing things that he does, and that, that his house, and so when we go back to our house, that's our laboratory to figure out how to do things. And I'm gonna run through this just because I know we have a lot of time. I don't have a lot of time. Next slide, please. So it's, what are the things that we take into calculation to figure out what we can and can't do and how to best plan our athletic performance world. And we have to take into account the chronological age, the training age, the injury history, the person's physical capacity. How strong is that person? How well does that person's physicalness match that person's job? And then their mental capacity. Next slide, please. So there's this big thing, that load, and this is really the magic. And when we can find that sweet spot where we are in the right amount of load, because if there's not enough load, we get weaker. And if there's too much load, that's when injury risk becomes way, way higher. So how do we figure that out? We could take and write down everything and every detail and everything we pick up, but in reality, that's too hard. So what we want to do is we want to look at really the number of hours that we actually work and then rate that number of hours. We can also look at GPS. We could also look at the number of recs, the complexity of recs, the level of stress at work, avalanche control work, snow surface conditions, hard conditions versus soft conditions, because all those have an effect on load. That if we put you on a vibration plate, just standing there and you're going against vibration, that's a huge workout. And that's similar to putting us on really, really hard packed snow, because of how those vibrations come up through the entire body. So it's really important for us to kind of look at as much of that stuff as we can. And during certain times, you can't, because it's an emergency and you're running. But when we can, we should kind of be taking a step back and saying, what do I do? How do I make this route better on my body? Next slide, please. So this is kind of what I alluded to a little bit, in the first one, that we do reps and sets, and if we wanted to do something lift, you lift a 20-pound, a 200-pound weight 20 times, that's 4,000 pounds of load. But the better way to do that in practical applications is to look at the number of hours that you're out there working, and then multiply that times one of these guys, and you rate your day every day, and we do it sequentially, and how hard that day is for you. And if you have too many hard days too quickly, that's what causes injury. Next slide, please. So we have this acute load versus chronic load, and all this is all exercise science. If you took an exercise science class, this is a basic kind of concept of how we figure stuff out. So if we were to do that number of hours times your perception, and we were to record it every day for a week, that would be our acute load. And if we were to take that in a month, that would be our chronic load. And we want to keep those guys somewhat similar. We want to have little increases and little decreases to give us more rest or less rest, depending on what we perceive the load is going to be in the future. Next slide, please. So this is from some research, and it just tells us that if there is too big of an increase in that load in that short time period, and we're just moving into a storm cycle, so all of a sudden everybody's load's going to increase, as opposed to if we have sunny days and everything kind of stays somewhat the same and the snow conditions are nice and all that kind of stuff like that. But what I'm trying to get is as you guys think about this and as we go into a storm cycle, we know that your load is going to increase. So what you got to do is kind of think about it and say, how do I decrease the load? And that's part of the calculation. And we can't always do it. That's just, that's just the nature of the beast. Next slide, please. So if we overload, we increase the risk of injury, and we can measure this stuff in other ways to tell us that we have overloaded. There's cool, easy ways to do it, and there's expensive ways to do it. So if we measure blood cortisol, and cortisol, a lot of you guys know this is a stress hormone, and we can actually measure that and say, this person's overtraining because their cortisol levels have become elevated. We can look at morning heart rate. We can look at how high someone can jump. We can look at how strong someone's grip strength is. All of these different things tell us about, have we moved into that chronic load state? Have we overtrained? Are we at a higher risk for injury? So the one thing that's kind of interesting is there's this rest acute sport thing, and they've started to use this in a lot of professional teams. And what it does is it takes a big, broad look, kind of like what I'm trying to get you guys to do, at us and make decisions and realize that it's not just how many recs we do, it's how happy we are at home. How many hugs do we get? All those things are part of the calculation of, hey, how do we deal with load? Next slide, please. So I kind of already alluded to this. The snow surface conditions is part of that load calculation. Next slide, please. So how do we know there is overtraining? I kind of alluded to this, that we look at all of those things, that we look at that. Next slide, please. So we rate our mood, our stress levels, our energy, our sleep quality and quantity, our diet, and how sore we are. And that's how we get it. And obviously, some of us that are more mature are more on the sore phase, but everybody gets sore when we overtrain. So there's going to be joint soreness, and then there's going to be muscle fatigue soreness. Next slide. So this is that rest acute thing that I kind of talked about, that it really, and could we all sit here and figure this out? 72 questions long, depending on which version. So it takes some time to do. There's some great websites that'll actually help us do this and actually give us a report for free. And I can get that back to you guys, the exact one. But it looks at all these different things: general stress, emotional stress, social stress, conflicts, pressure, fatigue, lack of energy, physical complaints, recovery subscales, success, social recovery, physical recovery, general well-being, sleep quality, sports-specific subscales, fitness, injury, burnout. It looks at this whole thing. There's all these questions. And if we sequentially ask people, we know what they're doing or what they're not doing, and how their load and how their recovery is going to be. So essentially, if we go back to LeBron has someone that does this with him every day, and then he checks everything. But we can still mentally go through this checklist and say, how am I doing? Am I getting enough hugs? Am I resting enough? Am I working too much? All of these are part of the things. Next slide, please. So how do we know how we need to recover? And we can recover by doing all that stuff that I've kind of been talking about. And then this is just a statement from another study. From the above mentioned research findings, it's clear that performance, some sort of recovery technique immediately after high intensity exercise plays an important role in enhancing performance during subsequent exercise sessions and matches. So it means that, okay, so you have a big morning. You take 10 or 15 minutes, you do some yoga, you do some breathing, you get a hug. All those things are part of this whole recovery process. And the more active and proactive we are, the less likely we're going to get injured and the healthier we're going to feel, and the less, Steve was talking about that there's a bunch of sick people. And this is part of the whole sick calculation, that if people are getting sick, they're not taking good enough care of themselves. And that's kind of a general thing, and it's not 100% true, but it's part of the picture. Next slide. So these are just kind of some of the things that we can use for recovery, and it's a long list, and you can add your own thing. And again, the patrollers that have been doing this for a while are going to have insights into what really works, what kind of daily habits are really helpful. Next slide. So too little is bad as too much. I already kind of alluded to this in the beginning, that we don't want to do too much or do too little, that we need to get in that sweet spot. Next slide. There's the whole preseason conditioning, and we're past this. But this is kind of food for thought for, okay, next summer, next fall, how do we get ready to be a ski patroller? And how do we mimic all of this stuff? And this is something that I think that I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk to you guys kind of, this is the big, look at the, the 50,000 foot look at what you guys do. And we're going to take a more micro look, and I'll make some more micro suggestions. And since I'm a chiropractor, I am going to have a little bit more focus on spinal mechanics. But it's an important thing to think about. And we do get some preseason conditioning. Next slide, please. So, and this is just saying that when we do something, we can change the intensity of, or the volume of it, or we can cross-train, and that is going to be a helpful part of the deal. And I'm not sure exactly how to work this into the ski patrol world, but it's something that we can definitely talk about. Next slide. And then this whole thing, taking mini breaks, that we need to take some time and chill. You go out for a big wreck or a big work, or it's been a big morning and there's been a ton of work. Take that couple minutes and chill, rest, hydrate, eat, do all that kind of stuff. Get hugs. Next slide, please. So this was just something that came up, and I wasn't even sure I was even going to put it up there, but if there's a new coach, there's more injuries. And you guys had a new patrol director last year, so there's a whole kind of change in the world. And in general, we like things to be the same. We do better with long-term stuff. I think that's the end that's my last slide, or no, is it more? Okay, and so this is just that gets back to that whole thing that I'm going to come back and we're going to talk more about biomechanics and how to specifically lift, bend, pick stuff up. And obviously, your jobs don't always allow you to do things in a perfect way, but the more closer we get to perfect, and that is my presentation. And if you guys see me on the hill, wear a blue kind of jacket, ride the chairlift with me. Let's chat. If you got questions, it's a great, whenever I have an opportunity and ride with one of you guys, we chat about, hey, how do I come back to your table and make things better? And then if you have a specific question, we can certainly address it. I'm done. Did I make my 10, 15 minutes?
You made a half-hour speech into 10 minutes.
Okay,
Thanks.
perfect.
So ask him questions. He's here to help.
And you can totally ask me questions here, there, anywhere. I'm good.
Right on. Thanks, Barry.
My pleasure.
Cool. Go to work. Have a good day.
And this whole presentation is on Google Slides. And so I have sent it to all of the powers to be, and they can forward it to you if you want it. And